All right, here we are, and we're talking about deacons, married deacons, women priests, Cardinal Muller, minor orders, all these things. And welcome back. We've taken a little hiatus, haven't we, Tim?
It felt like a long time, I think.
Yeah, we were. It's been 10 days, 11 days.
Yeah,
Yeah, I was in the
you're
holy.
back.
I was in the Holy Land. It was amazing. Our son Blaze got his first communion at the tomb, the Holy Sepulchre, and
Sweet.
we went to all the all the mysteries of the Rosary, like where the Annunciation happened, the Visitation, the Nativity, the Presentation, Golgotha, Agony in the Garden, everything. I mean, it was kind of crazy because I've always pictured it in my mind, but when you go there, it's a little bit different. You know,
How's it different?
you like go to the Sea of Galilee. I didn't realize the Sea of Galilee was that big, and there's like hills and mountains, and it's kind of like I explained to Father Hallwell. When you read Lord of the Rings, and you like have the whole landscape and how Gandalf's face looks and all. This is all like pre Peter Jackson. We lived in the old days,
Right,
right? And then you watch the Peter Jackson, and then you're like, well, that's not how I thought of it. You know,
right,
when
right.
Gandalf says "Thou shalt not pass," that's not how at all I imagined it. The way Peter Jackson did it, right? And then you can say to yourself, "Well, I like my way better." But when you go to the Holy Land and you imagine it a certain way, you can't say, "Well, I like my way better" because your way is wrong. Like that's
Yeah,
not how the Sea of Galilee looked. That's not how the boats look. That's not how Jerusalem looked or the Mount of Olives or all that kind of stuff.
right, right. I
So
thought you'd been before, though. Hadn't you
no, this is
been
my
before?
first time. First time
I
Holy
don't,
Land. Yeah,
I
here
don't know why I thought that.
I'm gonna throw up a picture here so people can see it. Yeah, so that's called the edicule on the screen. That's the it's kind of like a little box they built over the tomb of Christ, and we had the mass there. It was incredible. It was very, even though we were in the Latin Rite, Father goes in there and he says mass on the slab where Jesus was. Right, so after the
Wow.
gospel, he just goes into the tomb. He's gone, and then he comes back out like holding the chalice and the host, like coming out. I guess not the chalice, but the host
Wow.
in the ciborium, and had communion. I mean, dude, it was powerful. It was the most powerful day of my whole life. Definitely the best trip of my life.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
it looked amazing.
So, let's begin with a prayer. People have been asking us, Tim, to do more of this Latin. They like the Latin prayers. So I put together like a little sheet that'll go on the screen. I don't think you'll see it, Tim, but other people at home will see it. And so
Yeah,
I think we'll begin maybe just an Our Father, and then we'll jump in on this deacon stuff. Sound good?
sure.
All right, let's see if this works here. All right, there we go. All right. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus
It,
Sancti.
uh,
Amen.
Amen.
And last time people complained I went too fast, so I'll go very slow so you can follow along and see the words on the screen. Pater noster, qui est in celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimite nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimittimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem, sed libera nos a malo. Amen. In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen. All right. Well, Tim, so I guess the big story here is Cardinal Muller. Were you able to follow that over the last week or so?
Yeah, yeah. Uh, Definitely. The same way, follow everything every week with a little less attention to detail.
Yeah.
What he, yeah, he sounds like he's picking a side and he's not waffling from Cardinal Muller. We've always talked about him and some of the other conservative Germans, Ratzinger himself in a lot of ways, as if he'll say two good things and then one bad thing. Muller's been on a roll here, hasn't he?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. He's really attacking the the female diaconate, women deacons, deaconettes, as we call them here on TNT. And people are speculating that Cardinal Millar's coming out hard, AR-15 on each arm. Really, I mean, you look at what he says here. Because he worries that the Amazonian Synod's going to go that way. We talked about that on our Amazonian episode, that they want married priests, they want deaconettes, they want to change the subjects in the Eucharist. Basically, this is the small little pocket of I guess we could call them savages. They got second highest murder rate on earth. They're cannibalistic. They use hallucinogens. They're pagans. They worship idols in the earth. I mean, this is not Catholic civilization, and yet they're the ones that are supposed to evangelize us.
Right.
The church needs an Amazonian face. What? So they, like it said in the working document, Amazonian women are leaders. Therefore, we need to look at ways in which women can be incorporated into ministry.
This is the danger with holding up as exemplary, really anyone. I mean, but especially when you go to a relative dark spot in the world, one of the shadowy corners of the world, and you start holding them up as example. I mean, a human being, as we all know, not to get into a whole thing on sin, will always be subject to the claims of hypocrisy when you hold that human being up as exemplary. But come on, I mean, this is, as we've talked about before, this is an extreme. This makes for an extreme sort of picture of hypocrisy when we talk about the Amazonian women as being the paradigm instance of ground for change in a 2,000-year-old teaching, which Cardinal Millar says simply it can't happen. This would be false teaching. He uses the word false teaching.
Yeah, and it's, I mean, all ancient pagan cultures had priestesses and women spiritual leaders. Oracle of Delphi, Vestal Virgins, all these things were there. There's always priestesses. Judaism in the Old Testament was unique in that they had no female priests, ministers. It was all male because they were monotheists.
Right.
And the idea that God is the masculine active principle and that creation, is the created principle, required that ministry representing God would be male. It's so key. Like Judaism and Catholicism are unique in that conviction, and it's a sacramental signification that modern people don't, they because of feminism, and you've got a lot to say about that. They want to have women clergy. I mean, check this. I'm gonna put this there on the screen. That's what they want right there. This is that image we were talking about, right? She's got her hair done. She's got her cassock. Her cassock is tailored. It's stylish. You can't just have the normal cassock with the buttons down the front. You got to take your...
Where'd you get this picture? This thing is...
I searched women clergy or something, and there's so many. Like, so many of them are just, so embarrassing to look at, And this one was actually like one that was actually stylish. Right, because most of them are just it's embarrassing, right? And then I saw this one, I was like, this is what people would really like. This is like the epic, the highest point, the client, of a woman who has her hair done nicely. She's young, but she's got the trimmed, tailored cassock, no buttons down the front, right?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, this is probably not what's going to happen. What you're going to see are the same women who are the nuns on the bus, right? Without any class, coming in and wearing rainbow stoles and ponchos and,
Right. Yeah. I mean, this model who did this photo shoot or whatnot had herself together for the photo shoot. I mean, there are no issues with hygiene.
Right.
But whether or not priestesses would look this way is, it's a problem either way, because you're not. I mean, like you said, it's not going to be the old nuns with short hair and Teva sandals, but that's a problem in its own right. But so is a young, well-primped woman with flowy,
Right.
luscious blonde hair. That's not a Roman Catholic priest either.
No.
And we're not saying anything revelatory here, except for the fact that there's no way you can make this look good in the sense of a priest needs to look good.
Right. Yeah. Well, and, we've talked about it before, Tim, and one of the glories of the old Mass, the Latin Mass, is that, yes, the priest turns around 5 times and addresses the people. But for the most part, he's at the altar. He's
right.
he's ad orientem, he's looking at the altar. He's supposed to be blending in with the sanctuary.
Right.
It's not supposed to be Monsignor Chuck. Right. Ultimately, our attention should be on Jesus Christ. There's the crucifix, the tabernacle, the priest. He's facing away from us. On the back of his chasuble is usually a cross or something beautiful stitched in there, or a lady or something.
Right.
That is the traditional focus. Right. Not, Monsignor Bob. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Monsignor Chuck. How about those Minnesota Vikings? Everybody kind of chuckles uncomfortably because it's kind of funny, but also everyone knows that you shouldn't be doing this at Mass. Right.
Everyone chuckles uncomfortably at most of these jokes because they're the kind of joke that's not even a full joke, Like if you say, how about them Cowboys or whatever.
Right.
If it's the 90s, or how about the Minnesota Vikings? Everyone's just kind of like, yeah, I don't really know where you're going with this. We all usually priests that would mention sports don't have any expert knowledge about it.
Right. Yeah.
So it's kind of like they're just doing it to do it. Like when Monty Burns in The Simpsons is like, how about that local sports team? And he doesn't even know. I feel like the priest is half a step past that. He had to research that the Minnesota NFL team's called the Vikings. So part of it's just like this. I mean, the most important part is this is inappropriate. This is non-liturgical stuff. But the other part is just like this guy probably doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, even when he ventures into realms of, articles of entertainment. So, which he really, not that he shouldn't, but he shouldn't be talking about it. It's quite evident he doesn't.
Right.
It's even less fun. It's even less fun.
Yeah. So, I think we did a whole show where we talked about the diaconate, Tim, and we talked about Phoebe, and we talked about all these examples in which the Greek, is used of diaconate and deacon. And I think we did a good kind of apologetics episode on debunking all the New Testament passages that people use to justify women deacons. I mean, do you want to do that again, or we can run through it real quick?
Sure. Whatever you think is.
All right. Let me see if I can pull up my notes on that real quick.
In the meanwhile, I want to amend something that I said about Cardinal Millar. I said there's no trace elements of the schizo kind of waffling. Here, there is a trace element of it. I shouldn't have said that. I was going back and thinking about this. He writes, for 2,000 years, the Catholic Church has infallibly taught that the Holy Scripture and the apostolic tradition are the only sources of revelation, and that no further revelation can be added in the course of history. And he's furthering the claim that this would be a false teaching. He goes on to say, however, that there's no bad will evident on the part of the framers of the Instrumentum Laboris. It's his next line. I lost exactly where it is in this article, but it says there's no bad will here. It must have been an accident. All right, that doesn't. People go read this article. Cardinal Millar criticizes false teaching on Revelation in Amazon Synod Doc. This is on Catholic News Agency. That doesn't appear quite true, right? He seems to be insinuating nothing but bad will on the part of the framers of the Instrumentum Laboris. And what else are you gonna? How can there not be at least significant amounts of bad will on the part of the framers of the instrumentum. So to me, that feels like the old, right-wing conservative venture, which always is sort of counter-tendered by Cardinal Millar with a follow-up that softens the blow. I just don't like that stuff. It's doesn't make sense.
Yeah, we've kind of talked about it as the German theological mode of the last 60 years. Even the conservatives, in the German church, they say something, walk it back. Say something, walk it back.
Yeah.
Just say it. Just throw it out.
Why? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, here's exactly what Mueller said. I got the quote here. It's strong language. He says, the magisterium of the Pope and of the bishops has no authority over the substance of the sacraments. Cardinal Mueller continues, therefore, no synod, with or without the Pope, and also no ecumenical council, or the Pope alone, if he spoke ex cathedra, could make possible the ordination of women as bishop, priest, or deacon. They would stand in contradiction to the defined doctrine of the church. It would be invalid. I can't think of anything stronger than that.
No.
Because he even says, even if the Pope were to say it ex cathedra, it would be invalid. Now, this is an unusual situation because most of us Catholics believe that the Holy Spirit would prevent a Pope from ever saying error ex cathedra. And here we have a cardinal who's saying, even if he did say it ex cathedra. Now, that raises the question, that means we can maybe go back in time and say these other ex cathedra things are wrong. I don't really like how Cardinal Mueller is setting this up, but it's very strong. I mean, it seems like he's anticipating some kind of move from the Holy See in the next few months.
Yeah, and but I'm not anticipating an ex cathedra statement from the Pope. Not that I have the same amount of information he does. That would be very unexpected, though. I don't think any of the watchers are thinking that the Pope is going to come out and declare from his extraordinary magisterium and dogmatically define anything here. What about you? That seems unnecessary and over the top.
Yeah, that's why it's when I saw this, I thought, wow, Mueller's really he's 2 AR-15s, one in each hand. He's coming out really strong. He's not just saying it would be invalid, which he says. He makes a little litany of conditions like this. Therefore, no synod, with or without the Pope, and also no ecumenical council, or the Pope alone. So he has 4 contingencies here. If he spoke ex cathedra, could make possible the ordination of women as, and then he's very specific again, bishop, priest, or deacon.
Deacon, yeah, that's good.
I love it.
But I love it too. But I don't understand how an ex cathedra claim could ever be not valid by the Pope.
I mean, it seems to me that if the Pope came out and said ex cathedra, women are to be ordained to the Sacred Order of Deacon, you have 2 and only 2 options at that point. Mm-hmm. One, it's true. That is divine revelation that God revealed. I can't see how that works. Or, secondly, the Pope ain't the Pope.
Not Pope. Right.
Sede vacante.
Right. Yeah, we didn't talk about this ahead of time. That's just the principle of non-contradiction.
Yeah, exactly.
Because this is the Roman Catholic faith. I'd love to have him on the show for lots of reasons.
Right.
But what the heck is that?
Yeah.
What do you make of that? I don't know what to make of that.
Yeah, I mean it's a setup. I mean, what if that happened? Mueller would have to de facto be a sede vacantist, right?
I guess, yeah.
Or you would have to take some kind of position where popes can say something ex cathedra and be wrong, but now you just denied Vatican I.
Right.
So now we have 3 options: deny Vatican I, sede vacante, or accept it as true.
Right.
That's principle of non-contradiction right there.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's like really, really strong. Like stronger than you even need to stake your claim as an anti-woman deacon
Yeah.
prelate. But then he's saying, I mean, he's going really far on the one side of his mouth, but on the other, he's saying, I don't think the people that might be setting the kind of purposely missetting the rules of the game to cheat, I don't think there's bad will in that. I outside of politicking, I don't understand that. If this is if we're talking about a setup for a spike, the spike being an ex cathedra claim that would be heresy, according to him, how is there not bad will involved by it?
Yeah, I know. And he's coming out so strong, which makes me think he's either really worried or he's been briefed that this is going to go down.
You think?
Yeah. I mean, it's like a general saying, you're in a city, and he's like, if the north wall falls down, worst case scenario, here's what it means. And everyone says, what do you mean if the north wall falls down? Like, that's pretty bad. Like if our wall to our castle, if that wall falls down,
Yeah.
It's a worst case scenario.
In general. Yeah.
I mean, you have a cardinal of the church saying, if the Pope were to do this ex cathedra, it would be invalid.
Yeah.
So, all right. Okay, so let's look at why that would be. Let's look at, I found my old notes from our show on the deaconettes. So the first one's Luke 8:3, and this reads, and Joanna, the wife of Cusa, Herod's steward, and Susanna, and many others who ministered, the Greek there is diakonon, unto him of their substance. So people say, look, here's these women, Joanna and Susanna, and they are deaconing, literally in Greek. They're deaconing to Jesus. And so they say, see, these women were deacons. The problem with that is the Greek word, both the verb and the noun, deacon, literally just means to serve. Dia means through. Konos in Greek means common. So you're kind of going through the common things. That's what deacon means. Like setting the table, taking out the trash. I mean, this is the common things that servants do. So a diakonos is a common servant. The other one is Romans 16:1. St. Paul says, I commend to you Phoebe, our sister, who is in the ministry of the church, that is in Centre. So here, Paul says in the Greek, I commend to you Phoebe, our sister, who is in the diakonon, tes ecclesias, right? Literally in the deacon of the church. Now here, the Greek is masculine, right? So it's not feminine. So he's not saying she's a deaconess. And it's saying she's in the ministry, she's in the deacon of the church. So she's in the common service of the church. It doesn't mean it doesn't mean she's an ordained deaconess. So you'll hear so many people, well, Phoebe was a deaconess. How can you deny that? No, I do deny that. Look at the Bible. Right. I know your Bible may say Phoebe the deacon because you use a modernist translation. But if you use a real one like the Douay-Rheims, or you go back and look at the Vulgate, or just look at the original Greek, it doesn't say she's a deaconess or a deacon.
Right.
And then we also, Tim, remember we looked at Romans 3:4, where it spoke of the Roman emperor, in this case Nero, as a deacon. Romans 13:4, the magistrate, the emperor, is God's diakonos, masculine, working for thy good. Only if thou dost wrong needest thou be afraid. It is not for nothing that he bears the sword, for he is God's diakonos, still to inflict punishment on the wrongdoer. By the way, this is capital punishment, people, taught by St. Paul.
I was going to point that out.
Yeah. This is the locus classicus where, I mean, and we didn't mention this last time. Not only is Paul saying that the emperor bears the sword by God's authority,
but not in vain.
Yeah, not in vain. He's also using the word diakonos, deacon. So all of these liberals who want to deny capital punishment are like, oh, Phoebe was a deacon, Joanna was a deacon, Susanna was a deacon, even though it never says it with them. The only person who's called a deacon who's not an ordained deacon in the New Testament is the civil magistrate. in the context of capital punishment, and they all want to ignore that. That's not not on their deacon list.
I had this in mind when quick aside, Trent Horn yesterday was on Twitter, who I believe is a good, faithful servant of Christ. I think he's a good dude. I don't know him personally, but he does good work by and large, but he seems to be on the anti-death penalty vogue and riding that wave. And he tweeted, he's like, "Oh, I make the left mad usually. I made the right mad yesterday with, I guess, a previous statement. And this, I guess I must be doing something right." And I said, like, "Hey, Trent, I usually, support your work. I think you're a good guy, but no, I mean, to seek after balance, like let me piss off the left, let me piss off the right. It's like, right. This is not the truth. We seek after the truth.
Yes. It's
not always balanced. The truth in the New Testament, I had this passage in mind. I had a couple other passages in mind. Lots in the Old Testament, right? 264 out of 266 popes, Thomas, Augustine, Bellarmine. This is not acceptable. But yeah, it's a lovely, lovely passage in New Testament for two reasons. Because it proves that there's nothing inherently liturgical about deaconing, to use the term you keep using for Greek, and there's there is an absolutely secular usage of the term. You can deacon for God in a secular way, the way we're trying to do it right now.
Right.
And it also shows that the executive, whether it's a president or a Caesar or a czar, should be deacon for God by implementing commutative justice, and that in the Old Testament and in the New Testament, and it should be in the period going forth from the New Testament, includes holding the sword, which always means death penalty.
Yes.
So I don't know. They just trip around that, and I never got a response from Trent, but I know he's a reasonable guy, so he must just be overlooking this or something. Right. I don't know. Right.
Yeah, it's next time someone says, "Oh, Phoebe the deaconess," okay, you talk about that. Okay, now let's talk about Romans 13 about the civil magistrates deacon with the sword. What's your take on that?
And Nero, how about him?
Yeah, how about him as a Nero deacon? Yeah, how do you like that? And then the other one we talked about was Pliny the Elder. There's this, I'd seen this quote for years. Pliny the Elder refers to torturing two deaconesses of the Church of Rome. And this was always a slam dunk. And then one day I was like, well, I'm going to go read the Latin. And I read the Latin, and it speaks of these two women, ancile quae ministrae decepantur, women which are ministresses. It doesn't even have the word deacon in the Latin, but they translate it into deaconess. It's so dishonest. These scholars,
Wow.
They're translating Pliny to show that there's deaconesses in the early church. You read the Latin, it's ministrae, not deaconesses.
Wow.
So that's just dishonest, just straight up dishonest. So there's more. If you want to learn more on the history of women deaconesses and the references to them, we also showed that in most cases, patristic examples of deaconesses were in Syria and amongst the Encretite heretics. So
I remember.
Yeah, so we did a whole bunch of that on that one. So there is no tradition in the Bible or in the early church of ordained women deacons. Just get that out of your head. It's not true.
Which is the left's schizophrenia, and it's not a minor schizophrenia like we talk about the conservative German prelates. The left's schizophrenia, I was thinking about this yesterday in the context of transgender rights. 2/3 of the leftists are out there saying, I guess sort of honestly, deludedly about things like LGBT, or in this case, having women deacons. They're saying, we're progressives. We want progress. We want change. Hope and change. It's the Obama idiotic sloganeering, right? But about a third of leftists out there, every third leftist argument for progress, you get this more with the leftists in the Catholic Church. They're especially confused leftists. They will say this is ressourcement, right? This is a return to sources. This is not change. It's like, Well, then why call yourself a progressive? Guys like Cardinal Marx, maybe not Cardinal Casper, but Marx, McCarrick, the McCarricks of the world, openly identified as progress-oriented.
Right.
Well, okay, if it's just a ressourcement, then shouldn't you hate that? And I know, no, because it's a rhetorical talking point, but there's nothing, there's no party or ideology that's less square as to itself than progressives, because, you know, it might not be half-half, but almost half-half, you know, 2/3, 1/3 of the time, they're literally trying to define progress out of their title.
Yes.
And that's the idea here. And it's probably more like 2/3, it's probably flipped portions. In the Catholic Church with the liberals, 2/3 of the liberals have to cross-define this as ressourcement, a return to sources, which is why our point about Phoebe, Susanna, Joanna is so important. And I cited at the time, as a quick aside, the not great Catholic textbook that I always have used for church history, The Church Through History is the title of it, is excellent on this. Like, it's where I learned it from when I came back to teaching 5 years ago. I'm like, oh, okay, I'm glad they said this. And then only a year or two after I was back did I realize this would be a hotly debated topic in the Francis Pontificate. He started mentioning this. And I was like, oh, that's really good. They unnecessarily launch in TCTH into an explanation about how Susanna and Joanna were not deacons. So it's really good. But yeah, most of the progressives in the church play the ressourcement game, whereas most secular progressives just say we're progressives, and only a smaller portion of them say we're returning to sources. It's a really odd game, though. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, you know, it kind of struck me as you were talking that the ressourcement movement, like we're going back to the sources, is actually, it's in the same genus as Jehovah's Witness and Mormonism, because both of those paradigms believe that Christianity was just awesome, it was persecuted, it was pure up until the Constantinian era. And then after that, everything got sacerdotal and stiffened and liturgical and, you know, paganized and all that. And so what we need to do is we need to return back to the pure era. Right? That's right. The argument of Mormons and of Jehovah's Witnesses and basically all Protestants, Luther, Calvin, you know, all that. In the Catholic position, and I guess you could say the Eastern Orthodox position as well, as tradition, that it's not that you have a good era and then a break, and then we have to always be trying to go back, right? We believe there's actually just this amazing unbroken line, right? So we're in the stream of tradition,
right?
So we don't feel like we need, and there is clarity, and there is development, and there is councils, and yes, I do know that the Latin Mass has modifications over time, but it's this gradual tradition, right? And you know, you won't hear, I guess, you know, some trads, like I said, have kind of like, yeah, we got to go back to 1958 because that's when the papacy was lost or whatever. But, and maybe they don't. I don't know. They're probably going to correct us. But the Catholic viewpoint is that we are in this tradition. We don't need to, in a sense, skip back to a pure era. And when you read the Nouvelle Théologie guys like Balthasar, de Lubac, all of these guys, they talk about how Thomism got stiffened, hardened, double-decker Thomism, you know, all of these things that needed to be corrected, and they go back to the fathers. And they speak with careful derision of the scholastics, of the medievals, especially Thomas, even in the Franciscan scholastic tradition, like Bonaventure, Scotus, all those things. They don't like that. It's bad. And they have a very cocky attitude towards it.
I know, which is a dangerous game, friendo. When you're, I mean, I've did a tweet on this most recently about ever being at odds with Thomas. And again, I guess they would just have to respond. They have responded to people like you and I. Oh, well, it's not like the Catholic Church isn't a Thomas cult. It's like, well, you know, the Summa was put up there as the number one doctor book at the Council of Trent, right?
Yeah. On the
Obviously
altar.
under
Yeah.
the Bible, it's not revealed,
Right.
but he's the number one doctor in the church for a reason. So you pretty much don't want to run afoul of Mr. Thomas Aquinas. And these guys, they're cocky. Yeah,
he's
they
the DOC.
Really
he's the DOC.
Yeah.
Thomas is the DOC. Like, that's
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Now, there are others, of course, we know that. But, I mean, when it comes to that, I mean, you look at Leo the 13th and all the popes before him giving this special approbation to Thomas. And so to have the Nouvelle Théologie guys come around in the 40s and 50s and sort of snicker at that should be red alert.
We don't like it. No,
Yeah.
I mean, that's snicker at your own risk. Like Russell Crowe says in 310 Yuma, like, laugh while you can, baby, because that's not
It's getting deep.
doesn't end well usually when you're going up against Thomas Aquinas.
No.
And that's just a fact. It doesn't tend to end well.
Yeah. 310 to Yuma. Good stuff. Speaking of Thomas Aquinas, let's talk about the minor orders, because I think, it's not enough just to say, okay, we're against women's ordination. It's not just enough to say we're against married priests. Part of being a Catholic and part of being in the stream of tradition is understanding the whole enchilada, the whole package. Some people think, okay, you just go to the Latin Mass, check, I'm traditional. And it's a myriad of different elements. It's a culture, it's a way of thinking, it's a way of living, it's the calendar, it's the theology, it's the morality, it's the devotional life. And one of those things that people are really confused on is the sacrament of holy orders. Because in since the 70s, the pot got stirred, and there was a consensus up until the 70s. And since then, it's confused and people don't know. So Thomas Aquinas and the church fathers and the medievals and the scholastics and Pius X, everybody coming up, taught that there is the apostle. Christ instituted 12 apostles, and those apostles received the authority and power and sacerdotal function of Jesus Christ. So they could celebrate all the sacraments, they could preach, they could teach, they could consecrate altars, new churches, they could consecrate men to be bishops after them with all of those powers. Now, they didn't have the power of divine revelation, so they couldn't continue to write books of the New Testament. But all of that authority comes down through apostolic succession. So that's the apostle. And holy orders is really that authority that goes to the apostle. But then what we see in the book of Acts right away is the apostles themselves begin to delineate, bless you, and strip out of themselves their various functions to other men in a limited way. Right. And this is where you get what's called the 7 orders. And the 7 orders from the lowest to the highest are porter, lector, exorcist, acolyte, subdeacon, deacon, and priest. All 7 of those participate in a greater or lesser way in the office and order of the apostle bishop. So, maybe we should look at all 7. I'm going to put up this cool graphic on the screen that I found. So there on the screen, you see 7 clerics. And then on the far left is a doorway, and that's tonsure. So in the Greek and in the Latin church, when you entered into the clerical state, you were tonsure. They cut hair off the back of your head right there. And that symbolized you were now set aside for ecclesiastical work. And after tonsure, you received porter, and then lector, and then exorcist, and then acolyte, and then subdeacon, deacon, priest, and then bishop. So those are the 7 orders. And the first one is the porter. Now, the porter is just the guy who has the keys. He's kind of an usher. He opens the church. He closes the church. He kicks people out. If you're not baptized after the Mass of the catechumens, that is from the epistle to the gospel, eventually there's added the creed, you could be part of the church. But after that, if you weren't baptized, when you got to the lift up your hearts, we lift them up to the Lord, you're out. And the guys who went around and checked and took you out were the porters. So they have a liturgical function. And remember, the apostles, they're the ones in charge of the assembly, right? They monitor all this. Now, if they're on the altar, they can't also be in the same place moving people out of the church, right? Or opening and closing the doors. So in the very least of their powers and authority of overseeing the gates and the doors of the church, they stripped out this minor order of the porter. The next one is the lector. This is the reader. It's the job of the apostle to read the Bible, chant the Psalms, right? And so he stripped out this part with lector, the reader. The next one is the minor exorcist. This one confuses people, Tim.
Yeah.
They're like, whoa, exorcist is only number 3? Like, it's pretty far down there. But if you look at the early church, there were these there's major exorcists. That's like Emily Rose level, right?
Right.
These are usually priests who have special training, right? They're going in like Navy SEALs. But in the early church, there was the minor exorcist, and they would, according to the church fathers, every day lay their hands and pray for the unbaptized catechumens and for those who are having demonic problems. Every day, Tim.
Right. Yeah, when we talk about the removal or the ignoring, jettisoning of the minor orders, I always think about this one in particular, the minor exorcist, because the extra grace is being earned for the church by special daily prayer, eradication of wickedness in the lives of the faithful, just to have this gone, so that all you have are the major exorcists, the heavy hitters. Right. It's a tremendous blow to the church. This is the one I always say. I mean, I don't know. Maybe I don't know what you're going to say, but we don't. Porter's one thing, other people can open the door, but it's great to have somebody that's focusing their specialization of labor. This is all good anyway, and the porter's more than just that. He's also like the liturgical bouncer. Yeah, in an anti-Christian era, this is becoming increasingly necessary. Maybe he should have a GAT. I doubt he does, but I mean, the minor order exorcist is indispensable.
Yeah,
indispensable.
And just to give you a kind of how the early church functioned. So in the year 252, so we're about 70 years before the Council of Nicaea and the Nicene Creed. 252, there's a letter of Pope Cornelius to Fabius of Antioch, and he gives the count of what the clergy were in Rome in the year 252. He says they have 46 priests, 7 deacons, 7 subdeacons, 42 acolytes, and 52 exorcists, lectors, and porters. He kind of groups all those together. So that's pretty sizable. I mean, you got a good sized clergy there. 46 priests, 7 deacons, 7 subdeacons, 42 acolytes, and 52 exorcists, lectors, and porters. This shows us that as early as 252. So this is pre-Constantinian. This is not corrupted Catholicism, imperial Catholicism. That 252, so 220 years after the resurrection of Jesus, the church in Rome has a pope, priests, deacons, subdeacons, acolytes, lectors, acolytes, exorcists, lectors, and porters. They got the whole shebang, all 7, 252.
Yeah.
But then in 1972, Pope Paul VI comes along and says, yeah, we don't need that anymore.
Yeah.
What? This is patristic. This is the Roman Rite.
But it's the 20th century. We don't need anything dusty and old anymore. Yeah. Yellowing at the fringes.
Right. And this is like what you're saying about the Nouvelle Théologie, like ressourcement. Oh, let's go back to the early church, like pre-Constantinian. Oh, okay, so you want to have porters and lectors and exorcists and acolytes and subdeacons. Like, no, we don't want that. What are you talking about?
Yeah.
That's how the church was.
Yeah.
Pope Siricius, so he's later. He's in the late 300s, I believe. He mentioned how young men would go through holy orders. So from boyhood, they would be porters and lectors. And then about the age of 20, if they wanted to move forward, they would be promoted to acolyte and subdeacon, and then go on from there. So remember, in the early church, there wasn't a seminary. Guys didn't go off like 100 guys in one area and take courses and classes. The Romans would have just come to those places and killed everybody. Right. So it was more of like an apprenticeship. You would have been assigned to a holy priest, and you would spend a number of years in each of these orders, and you would attain more and more of the sacerdotal ministry, climaxing in deacon or priest, or in some cases going on and being the bishop of the town.
Yeah.
So lector reads, exorcists, they would lay hands and pray. And there was, from what I understand, it was just one exorcism that they had memorized. And people would line up outside the church, and they would come out, do their minor exorcism. People would go off, and do their work. Acolyte, these guys were in charge of lighting the church, serving at the altar. They didn't touch the sacred vessels, though. That was only for the subdeacon. Now, what's interesting is there's 4 and then there's 3. The 4 minors, that you could have married men in those. You could have a married guy as a lector. But once you get to subdeacon in the Roman Rite, that's celibate. And that's because the subdeacon actually touches the sacred vessels, chalice and paten.
Sure. So, that we should talk about there are two layers of distinctions here. Anyone that's handling the sacrament, of course, celibate,
or even the vessels,
or even the vessels. It's like a first order, second order thing, first class, second class thing. Important that shows Eucharistic reverence in its proper place. Arguably now we're a little suboptimal. So that's the first distinction. Is celibacy runs with in direct correspondence with Eucharistic veneration, Eucharistic handling. But the second distinction is that one would make is that all of these were male. All these were male offices, and that corresponds not with the Eucharist in particular, but more generally with the activity versus passivity distinction. And as you said before, the male is always active. The female is always passive and receptive. And this is not just a liturgical distinction, by the way. I mean, this is how procreation works. This is how Christology works. This is how ecclesiology works. This is how men and women relate to each other generally when they're having successful relations. I don't even mean sexual relations. I just mean rapport between men and women. There's an activity and a passivity.
Priests and nuns, right?
Like priests and nuns are active and passive. So the point is, celibacy is great. The priest, the bishop will always be celibate. And we put that aside when we're talking about the Amazonian Synod and the dishonest, I think, bad will set up for it here, reflected in the Instrumentum Laboris. We're talking about that second distinction where it's like it doesn't matter whether or not we're dealing with deacons who not all of whom will be, most of whom will not be celibate. We're dealing with the activity-passivity dichotomy and the novelty of this cadre in the church now pushing progressives, radicals, now pushing for a blurring of that line. Well, women that are active, right? I mean, this is obviously, and I think an important issue to me. I'm nearly done with the book on it, and it's not just within the church. There's a push within Protestant, Catholic. I don't know. I don't think Eastern Orthodox Christianity as much, but within most of the Christian, Christianity within the world today, Protestant and Catholic, there's a major push happening for intra-Christendom feminism, and this is a contradiction in terms. And the fundamental premise is the blurring of the activity passivity thing, right? Women should be active, and it's like,
Yeah.
why? Justify that. I want to hear your.
Right.
I mean, against all of human nature and all of nature and all of 2,000 years of Christian establishment of tradition, big and small t. Why? Make me a case for that. They'll never address that, right? Alfred North Whitehead said, "You judge an age not by its suppositions, but by its presuppositions." I want to hear the presuppositions externalized.
Yeah. And you think about the wrecking ball that's already been used. So first they took a knock against the minor orders. Then they said, okay, and now we're going to get rid of the subdiaconate, which is ancient, 200s. Then we're going to change the diaconate. We're going to have married deacons. I want to talk about this too. And then they said, okay, we're going to have women lectors, women readers, and we're going to have female altar boys.
Mm-hmm.
And to top it all off, even though before in the traditional church, a porter couldn't touch the Eucharist, a lector couldn't touch the Eucharist, an exorcist couldn't touch the Eucharist, an acolyte couldn't touch the Eucharist, a subdeacon couldn't touch the Eucharist, not even a deacon could touch the Eucharist except by a dispensation. Now we are going to have women being extraordinary ministers of Holy Communion every single day, 365 days a year, all over the place, up at the front of the church. So now they're basically taking over these minor order functions at the altar. They're reading, they're serving at the altar, they're touching the Eucharist. Because this has happened already, people are shrugging their shoulders like, well, why, if we've already given them all these these minor order functions, let's just keep pushing it towards the top.
Right.
And they have an argument there.
Right.
That's why I'm opposed to everything being allowed in the first place. But they have an argument there. Like, if these in the tradition of the church are priestly, sub-priestly
right.
things, these are traditionally holy order items, and women are doing them, well, it's inconsistent and unfair not to let them have the whole thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's inconsistent with regard to its own logic. Sure.
Yes.
Yeah, which is what you're saying. It's like, yeah, we're not for any of it, but yeah, once you're halfway down the slippery slope, you're probably sliding off the building. That's all you're saying.
Yeah, and that's why if you're a priest or a deacon or a layman, and you're part of the situation where you have girls serving on the altar, and you have women reading the lessons, and you have women handing out Holy Communion, you are part of the pro-ordination mechanism. Whether you believe it or not, or recognize it or not, you are part of it. Because what you're doing, this is going to be uncomfortable for people. What you're doing is you're taking the sacerdotal functions of the minor orders, traditional minor orders, and you're putting them into the hands of women. And that only helps the argument. You can't stop it there and say yes, but not hearing confessions and not consecrating the Eucharist. That's where I stop it.
Right.
Because the understanding in the Catholic Church is that everything below priest, all those ministerial functions, diaconal functions, sacerdotal functions, they're all stripping out and participate to be Platonic. These are minor participations in the priesthood. That's probably how we should have said it from the beginning. These are participations in the priesthood. And if you are doing that, or you are allowing that, you are part of this problem, this Amazonian problem.
Yeah, and again, I agree 100%. And we didn't talk about this ahead of time. Barely spoke about anything today ahead of time, but it's just a question of internal consistency, right? And absolutely, fearing what we're supposed to fear and embracing what we're supposed to embrace. And the principle of non-contradiction being what it is, there's no way to disagree with that statement. It's like, yeah, we don't. A lot of people might be out there scratching their heads, like, oh, but my priest is good. My priest might even, be experimenting with ad orientem posture during the consecration. He gives good homilies, but he does have girl altar boys. It's like, no, I know the type. I know the type. The claim that Taylor's making isn't that they're part of the ill will, right? It's that they're being used and insufficiently vigilant against. This is the kind of thing that all, even people of goodwill, can be subject to at various times. It's like, yeah, that's true. That a lot of good priests might be out there watching this, like, hopefully not feeling attacked, but yeah, I shouldn't allow girl altar boys. This is a minor sacerdotal function. And the whole point, we've talked about this countless times on the show, the whole point of altar boying is preparatory, right? There's a hermeneutic of preparation there.
Yep.
And
it's apprenticeship.
It is apprenticeship. And that's what all this other stuff is as well. Even in cases where, there's a discreet porter and he's a grown man and he's never going to be a priest probably.
Right.
There's still a participation in, what the sacerdote does during the liturgy, and that's it's inherently active. It's inherently male.
Yes.
I don't know how many times you can say this stuff. I mean, the people that are out there listening are listening, and well, I guess I don't know how you can say all this stuff, and I go back to what might sound like a talking point, and then out of the other side of your mouth say, but the people that are preparing the instrumental bores, they probably have at least goodwill, even if they're mistaken. I mean, this is simple stuff. This
right.
is not. We deal with some technical stuff sometimes on our shows, but I feel like a lot of it's really simple, and I feel like a lot of this is purely just common sense. We all know this is the case, and we all know that the case is that the preparers of agendas are usually the ones who are the guy behind the guy behind the guy that are really working the ill effects.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I kind of think, back in the early church, before Trent, there wasn't this, oh, you're a non-married, on-fire Catholic male. Are you going to seminary? Are you going to be a seminarian? It's kind of this light switch on or off. In the early church, it was more of this apprenticeship. So you were a young man and you were a porter and a lector. Like the porters didn't just lock the church. They also led the processions, right? To kind of part the crowds and make sure the clergy got where they wanted to be. Like you said, they're kind of the bouncers, the liturgical bouncers. Or a lector. And, a young man might be, well, let's say he's 23. Well, I'm an acolyte right now. I'm, discerning if I want to go on a subdeacon, right? So it was instead of being like a light switch on or off, it was this many different shades moving right up to the priesthood.
Right, gradation.
Right? Yeah, gradation, which is very Platonic, right? It's not just like jumping off the diving board, into the cold water. It's kind of one step in and then another step in and another step in. And I the more I think about this, the more I think in the crisis in the seminaries, it seems that perhaps this more, patristic, this was going, I mean, even in the seminaries, every year or two, right, they were getting these minor orders. This is one of the reasons why Archbishop Lefebvre had so many young seminarians coming to them, is they were in seminary, they were a lector and they're supposed to get exorcist the next year, and the seminary announced, no more minor orders. Sorry, folks. They're shut down. They're like, what? I want to go through all the minor orders. So they would find traditional bishops and say, hey, can you give me acolyte? I need acolyte, and then I need subdeacon, right? All this stuff was torn out in the 1970s. I think it was 1972 is when Paul VI said, minor orders, gone.
What was the ostensible reason given? I forget. I haven't looked into the minor order jettisoning so much.
I think they had lost their actual function, right? So if you were a seminarian, okay, so before Trent, these orders were pretty much functioning. When Trent happened, they realized, look, our priests are not well formed. They, their Latin is not good. Their theology, their philosophy is not good. Let's institute what becomes the seminary. That's a Tridentine movement. So when Trent happened, the seminaries were formed, and like we can make higher quality priests by putting them all in the same place. So when that happened, all the parishes, your local parish maybe had a porter and a lector and an acolyte in it. Well, when the seminary structure was invented, that sucked everything out of the parishes. And this is also when altar boys basically became popular, because you no longer had these guys serving at the altar with the priest. The only guys left were the boys. And so they said, okay, altar boys will start functioning in these minor orders during the low mass or the high mass or whatever. So that the late 1500s, there was sort of an earthquake, and these things change. And so since then, there was your porter at seminary. He wasn't going and opening the local parish church. He was at seminary. So they lost their function. And so I think by the 1970s, since they're making all things new again, they're like, yeah, let's just dump these things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. Well, you see how it's a long, wending unraveling. It's an unraveling that has been a long time in the coming, and again, further evidence is design. There's design behind it, but it's frightening. It's a frightening prospect because any kind of ordination, female deaconesses, the world, all the Catholic world would wake up more so than with girl altar boys, and yet it would be too late. Once you get the third order, once you get any kind of ordination of women, it's too late. It's still not too late, even when there's no ordained women in the church.
Right.
And, which Millar's making the almost over the top claim that this is, impervious to even, extraordinary magisterium of the Pope. I've never heard that. But this is the time, I guess, to do something. I don't know what to do. I mean, we come back to that, but it's not too late after we have girl altar boys. It will be too late after they get in deaconesses. Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. What I see happening right now is, amongst traditional groups, there is this new enthusiasm for Ember Days and traditional Roman Rite baptism and all these. It's kind of a renaissance going on right now. And
it is.
Part of that is people are finding and rediscovering the minor orders. And they're having the conversation that we're having right now, that it's just not, can a woman be ordained a deacon or not be ordained a deacon? That the conversation actually has to be rooted in the Catholic tradition of holy orders. We need to start talking about minor orders. We need to talk about subdeacon and deacon. I think currently, this is my opinion, there's this idea in Catholic seminaries amongst traddy seminarians, I'm a instituted acolyte, so I'm basically a subdeacon anyway. I don't like that. That's sloppy. Yeah. We got to get away from that. We need to get back to, I had heard that there's a Jesuit who asked the Jesuits, could he receive all the minor orders through his ordination? And they said yes, and he did. Amongst the Jesuits. We're not talking about the fraternity or SSPX. We're talking about the Jesuits. So it might be that we start to recover the traditional understanding of orders. And I think that will insulate and protect. And again, in these places, you don't have women Eucharistic ministers. You don't have girl altar boys. You don't have women lectors. All that stuff isn't there. And so if you're in a context and you're in a parish where there are women Eucharistic ministers, I don't see how you're going to unwind that.
Right. You can't.
They've been established for decades.
Right.
Same with, and here's another controversial thing that'll step on some toes, the married diaconate. There's been some studies on this too. Can there be a married diaconate in the Roman Rite? Currently there is, but is it fitting? Is it part of it? The deacon touches the sacred vessels. Jerome says anyone who touches the sacred vessels must be celibate or continent. So even if you were a married man, you shouldn't be having relations with your wife if you're going to touch the vessels. That's
ever.
Yeah. Once you enter into subdiaconate or deacon or priest, and you're touching the sacred vessels, you should be continent.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Where does he say that?
Jerome?
Right. Yeah.
Well, I don't have the citation off the top of my head, but Jerome does it. And other fathers too. I think Siricius, Pope Siricius also says that. That's why you'll see in traditional Latin Mass places, if an altar boy goes to get a chalice or anything like that, he'll put on white gloves.
Yep.
That's not just because it's fingerprints. It's because he literally can't touch the vessels because he's not a subdeacon, deacon, or priest. Wow. Right. Or the altar guild ladies, right? If they're setting stuff out, they'll put on gloves because they're not allowed to touch it. This stuff matters. It's old. It's cool. You know?
It does.
It reminds and like, well, that sounds kind of fussy. This is the Eucharist, the body and blood of Jesus Christ. All of these things matter. If you start chopping away at these levels of reverence, you eventually destroy belief in 50% of Americans don't believe in transubstantiation. Catholics.
American Catholics, yeah.
Just came out. I was surprised it was as high as 50%.
Yeah. Were you? You're
no, I thought it'd be more like 20%.
That actually believe?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did too. Well, I've heard it's more like 10 to 20%.
Right.
Trads throw that around, and I'm like, where are we getting the 50%? I guess maybe there's been a rise in it, or
right.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's practicing Catholics, but you know, when you take away the kneelers and you take away the altar rail and you take away communion on the tongue and you have lay people handing out Holy Communion and you put the altar in the middle of a circle and you do all these things, it's chip, 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 chip. You chip away. You put the tabernacle down the hall. All of those things reduce belief in the real presence in transubstantiation.
Without a doubt.
Yeah.
All of those things, to bring it back to the Millar goodwill, badwill judgment call, maybe the priests that are kind of being ordered to do these things, pastors, maybe they don't know, but what can possibly be a goodwill motivant for all this stuff, given
right.
the demands of lex orandi, lex credendi, the way you worship will be the way that you believe. I can't think of one.
Right.
The best they can come up with is like efficiency demands, and that's not good enough when it's the body and the blood of Jesus.
Right. That's right. It's no good.
But it's flimsy anyway. That's my point.
Yeah. So what do you think about the married deacons? What's your take on that?
I mean, historically, when I hear, it's not something I have a strong position on, but historically when I hear you talking about it, there's a strong tradition against it. And liturgically and sacramentally, there seems to be a case against. I mean, what you're saying about continence, and I've seen it before, and just sort of put it out of my mind. There's something to be dealt with there. I'd have to. I don't know. I'd have to put it in order.
The Greek Orthodox have married priests and married deacons. They don't have married bishops. But I have a buddy who's an Eastern Orthodox priest, raised Baptist, converted to Eastern Orthodox. He says that they're supposed to, the deacons and the priests, all the ministers of the altar, from Vespers on Saturday night, so 5 o'clock, till Vespers on Sunday night, 5 o'clock, Divine Liturgies in the morning, the Eucharist in the morning, from basically 5 p.m. to 5 p.m. from Saturday, Sunday, they can't have relations with their wives. And this goes back to Moses when he goes up on the mountain and he says, don't touch the mountain and don't have relations with your wife, because the presence of God is coming down, and there's this ceremonial time of continence in which we take our eyes off the lower things, right, of this world, and we become focused on the transcendent, on the higher. And so, in the Eastern Church, they only have the Eucharist, celebrate the Eucharist on Sundays. So their deacons and their priests have relations with their wives all week long, but then from Saturday night to Sunday night, they pause. Whereas in the Roman Rite, we have the Mass daily every single day. So if you're going to take the logic of the Eastern Orthodox from Vespers to Vespers, no relations, you would then have to have, if you did daily Mass, no relations from Monday night to Tuesday night and Tuesday night to Wednesday night. Basically nothing, continent. And that's the Roman tradition. That's why we have daily Mass and the Easterns don't.
Right. I didn't know that.
Yeah. So I have heard Catholic scholars, and they get themselves in trouble, say, well, the deacons and the married deacons in the Roman Rite should at least follow the Greek custom. Saturday night to Sunday night, continence.
Right.
Yeah. Celibacy means not married. Continence means not having relations.
Right.
And of course, this gets everybody going crazy. There was a really smart priest in, great guy in Denver, Father Gary Sellin. He's at the seminary there, and he did, I think, his doctorate on this topic. And he did the patristic, the liturgical, everything in the Church Fathers on this whole idea of continence and celibacy in relationship to ministry at the altar, the sacred vessels, even things like the divine office and all that. It's pretty interesting. But his conclusions are not widely accepted by the mainstream, especially the married deacons. So, when the married deacons, they are deacons. I don't want them, they can't stop being deacons, right? They're ordained as a deacon. I don't think they're being malicious or doing anything wrong. And I know married deacons, and I encourage them to continue in their ministry. I just think moving forward in the traditional understanding of holy orders, it would be more helpful to have all celibate deacons. Same thing with priests. That's my position on it. So if you're a married deacon out there, I don't hate you.
But would you call on a no? Yeah, clearly not. It's less of an abuse than the topic of today's show. Women deacons. There's more of an egregious change there. But would you say that you might have to think about it or whatever? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. Would you say you think all deacons don't stop being a deacon? New deacons should be all celibate, but do you think that all existing deacons should practice continence?
Yeah, I think, gosh, I'd have to think more about this because I haven't thought about what the application is to it. But I kind of remember talking to Father Sellin about it, and he kind of thought, when deacons assist the priest on Sundays, that they should have this continence worked into it as a kind of a minimum. And there's other people too. I think Dr. It's Ed Peters, right? The canon guy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
He wrote an article too saying that according to canon law, the rule of continence falls on even married deacons, and all the married deacons in the world went crazy over this. But Ed Peters says that canon law, read accurately, says that even deacons, married deacons, have to observe continence. That's on the books.
Wow. Oh, it's on the books.
That's what Ed Peters says.
Just before Sundays or before all Mass?
I'm not Ed Peters, and I can't remember the article, so I can't remember if he said just when they serve at the altar or all the time.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then I'm also really against this idea of transitional and permanent diaconate. I'm vocal about that. Because when you're a deacon and then you become ordained a priest, if you are ordained a priest, you are still a deacon. Mm-hmm. And when you're a priest and you're ordained a bishop, you're still a priest and a deacon and a subdeacon and a acolyte and an exorcist. All that stuff, everything that participates below is in the higher.
Right.
Right. So saying a transitional deacon makes it sound like I'm a deacon in seminary, and then when I get ordained a priest, I'm not a deacon anymore. I'm now a priest.
So you're just objecting to the terminology?
I don't like the terminology. I think they should say celibate deacons and married deacons, because that's what we're really talking about. Have you ever met a permanent deacon who wasn't a married guy?
No, I don't.
They're all married.
I don't think so.
Yeah. So we should say he's a celibate deacon, and then this guy's a married deacon, not permanent. Because Pope Benedict XVI is still a deacon right now.
Yeah.
He's still a deacon. And in the old rite, The priest continued to wear the maniple on his arm, which is a sign of service because he's still deaconing. He's still a deacon.
Right.
And the bishop would wear the chasuble, priesthood, the dalmatic, deacon, and the tunicle, subdeacon. He'd wear 3 vestments on top of each other. You see pictures of Cardinal Burke like this sometimes, the old school way. They've got and then they got the bishop's hats. They got bishop, priest, deacon, subdeacon. They're wearing it all.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Yeah, it's a process of sublimation.
Yeah, it's Platonic.
Where the higher continues with the subsumption.
There it is.
The higher subsumes the lower into it. Yeah, I mean, you've thought about these things a great deal more than I have, but I mean, it's a strong case. I don't know. Yeah. I don't know what and I'm not naive enough to assume that there's much of a counter argument on the other side, because the other side is progressivism. So yeah. I'll have to think about these things more, but there's certainly a distinction of kind at work in the works right now with the Amazonian Synod. I mean,
right.
You acknowledge. I mean, this would be a whole new register of progressivism stealing its way into the priesthood, right, or the ordained class of Catholics, right?
Yeah. And I guess let's to the question, Tim. What if, following Cardinal Millar, what if Pope Francis says at the end of the Amazonian, ex cathedra, I'm ordaining, women can be ordained, and I'm ending this event by having Sister Shirley come up and be ordained deacon for her community. And everyone's, oh, so awesome. You know, love is love, whatever, you know.
Yeah.
Like, you know, what would we do? What would we do? Would we call up Cardinal Millar and say, hey, will you be elected as a pope against the anti-pope? I mean, is at that point, do you break communion? Are you set of I mean, what would happen if that did happen?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I honestly don't know. This is where I think it's good that we, you and I, roll tape or whatever the proper verb is there without thinking about it. I mean,
because we're live right now. We can't fudge this. We're live.
Yeah. I honestly don't know, and I'll have to think about it more. I mean, here's the general way to typify the last 6 years under Francis. People have heard me say it countless times, and I think you as well. The acceleration it's constantly accelerating. It's going so fast now that we're reaching what, in algebra you'd call a vertical asymptote. At first, the process of acceleration was once a month there'd be a little change, then twice a month, and it's going so fast now that I can't keep up with it, even though I'm thinking about this stuff all the time, teaching it, talking about it, writing about it, dialoguing about it with my friends. It's like I literally I wasn't, when it was like, what do you think of Amoris Laetitia, Tim? I had an answer. It was right. Obvious. That was the main mark of the first half of his pontificate. That was the two synods building up to Amoris Laetitia. People always will note that I go back to that because it's simple. It's sort of linear. Bad. I'm against. I mean, it evidences a conspiracy. It evidences ill will, etc. The second half of the pontificate thus far, in 6 years, has just been ever accelerating change. And so it's so hard to keep. I don't know what I would do at this point, and I'm not gonna. That's all I can say. I mean, there's so many, and the female diaconate question is only one drop in the bucket. I'm sad to say there are so many issues over the last 2 years where it's like, shoot, you're putting a better to his money, which is what the worldwide, global, progressive, radical, Jacobin left is so good at doing. Yeah. Right? They weren't that good at doing. With someone like me that was studying it and cared about it, when you make the changes slowly, it's like, okay, this is going to be my position. I'm going to write at least some articles on this, or write a book against this, or whatever. But when it's just every day now, boom, 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 boom. It disincentivizes even someone that doesn't mind committing to positions like me or you. It disincentivizes even further looking. It's like I can't be writing 10 articles a day, you know. So I look a little bit less now. And then it's like there's so many changes that it's like, which hill am I going to die on? And I honestly don't know. So I mean, the Pope, we have to be able to trust our Pope, and we can't.
So I'm glad you brought this up, because when I was in Israel, in the Holy Land, and seeing, you see the non-Chalcedonians, the Armenians, the Syriacs, the Greeks, all these groups, and it hit me, Tim, that in all of these ancient theological contests, eventually it boiled down to one word. Catholics go around, they're all debating about the pre-existence of Christ, all these things. That eventually, like, are you homoousia or not homoousia?
Right.
Consubstantial. You could walk up to any bishop, priest, deacon, nun, anybody, and say, homoousia, yes or no? And depending on that answer, everything was settled. There was a very clear line, right? And then when you get to the Nestorian controversy, is Mary Theotokos or not Theotokos? Mother of God, not Mother of God? Answer the question. And if the bishop said not Theotokos, you're like, Nestorian heretic, I'm not going to your mass, you're not my bishop, you're not my priest, you're not anything, right?
Sure.
This is how, or with the Greeks and the Latins, filioque, yes or no? Do you believe that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son? Filioque. This is how things go down. And I was thinking when I was over in the Holy Land, what is our word for this time? We are in a crisis right now. And unfortunately, we have guys like you and me and others and LifeSite and Church Militant and 1 Peter 5 and guys like Schneider and Cardinal Burke. And we're doing all this commentary, and it's pretty advanced stuff that we do. Right? We're going through documents, we're going through footnotes, we're pulling things out of Scripture, we're looking at Thomas Aquinas, and we're analyzing this in a global way. But there's not a way for grandma in the pew and grandpa and the 18-year-old to just cut to it and say, is Mary Theotokos or not Mary Theotokos?
Why not?
Well, we don't have a word. It's like, well, what do you right now? It's you walk into the narthex after Mass. So what do you think about this footnote in Amoris Laetitia 8?
Right.
That's it's helpful, it's good, but we can't get clarity on any of these topics in the church if that is the question. Or the Amazonian Synod's coming up, and there's talk about women being ordained as deacons. What do you think of that?
Right.
It's too complicated.
And
it's like proto-Arianism. Do you think when you think of Jesus Christ, did he pre-exist creation or not? Like, were you talking about his humanity or his divinity? It's complicated. But eventually it gets boiled down to, is Jesus, the second person of the Trinity, consubstantial with the Father? Homoousios. Answer the question, yes or no, right now.
Right.
And then your bishop says, no, he is not consubstantial. You're an Arian. You're outside the church. I will not receive your priest or your communion or your sacraments. You're Arian.
Right.
And so I'm just wondering, what is our term? What is our, what is it? The linchpin? Is it the...
Sure.
The shibboleth. The shibboleth. What is the shibboleth? Yeah. Right? This is from the Old Testament. You had to say the word shibboleth. And by the way you said it, you either were an imposter or you were real. What is our Catholic shibboleth for 2019, 2020? Where we know that cardinal's in, that cardinal's out. This bishop's in, this bishop's out. Because right now, it's hard to tell.
Well, remember, I think the terminology gives a clue as to the content. It has to have something to do with the modernism, non-modernism question.
Right.
I like Pius X. Are you a modernist or not? Pius X. So what I'm trying to say is that this name modernism contains an important clue as to why it's so difficult with the modern crisis, and it's because it's a sum of heresies. It's a sum of heresies. So there are a few things happening at once. Shoot, I mean, it's maybe more than a few. It's several things. It's a couple handfuls of heresies happening at once. I mean, the Amoris Laetitia thing, communion for the divorced and remarried. Yes, it's still Eucharistic. This ultimately, the problem stemming from female deacons is at least partly Eucharistic in its origin, but there's more to it than that. It's not just a subset of a Eucharistic kind of misteaching, right? There's a few. That modernism is also about belief. Do you believe that Jesus, that one God is knowable through the reason alone? That even is part of modernism. If you answer no, there's so many tentacles to modernism that it's almost impossible. Not only is there not a good name, I think modernism is the best name that I've thought of so far. Are you modern or not? Are you modernist or not?
But if you read Pius X on the modernists, he says that one of the things about them is that they deny being a modernist.
That's true. That's true.
Right? So if you read Pascendi, he has a section on this. So if you went to an Arian and you said, is Jesus Christ consubstantial with the Father or not consubstantial with the Father? They would say yes or no. But the modernists, if you go and ask, he's like, well, homoousia, but there's different ways of understanding homoousia.
It's true.
Right?
It's true.
Everything is this magic show, right? So if you say, do you believe in the virgin birth to a modernist? They'll say they don't really believe Jesus was conceived of a virgin. They'll say, well, yeah, I mean, there's, virgin, I do believe in the virgin birth, but by virgin, I mean in the ancient way of respecting virginity as a pure person. And I believe Our Lady had pure intentions. And so she was virginal in that way. But they're not ever going to really show you all the cards up their sleeve. They're just going to tell you, if you go up, hey, Father, that sermon sounded like you denied the virgin birth. Do you believe in the virgin birth? Oh, I believe in the virgin birth, yeah.
Right.
Do you believe in the real presence? Oh, yeah. But what he means is the memory of Jesus is present with us when we come together as a community. Not that the objective body and blood and soul divinity is on the altar.
Right.
Modernism is diabolical.
Right. Yeah. No,
it's modernism is an infiltration because Arians were just wanted to have the whole church, right? The modernists are content to come in and secretly subvert.
Right.
It's an infiltration.
No, agreed. This is why, there's also a debate among the faithful. I don't think it's much of one on whether or not, this is a bigger crisis now than in the middle 300s with Arianism. I think definitely for that reason that it's, you could draw an analogy to feminism. People say, oh, well, less women now consider themselves feminists than in the 70s. It must have gotten better. No, it's actually gotten far worse. Right. It's just that the term feminist has now, it used to be a germ that was still entering the body. Now it's just in the body. A bunch of conservative women, a bunch of women, dare I say, that watch our show, really have incorporated tons of feminist premises. So they don't even have to think, self-billing, as we all know from the late, great Michael Scott, his show's gone anyway. Self-consciousness, self-awareness is a very funny thing. That's what made The Office great. So people don't always know how to bill themselves. And yeah, so it's true of feminism. People are more feminist now than in the 70s, even though they're less self-described. People are susceptible of this in the church as well, and I think that's what makes your point good.
Yeah. It's a long game. It's an infiltration. Modernism is just more careful. It's just more careful. It's more seductive, and but we don't have the word. That's what I'm trying to. We have to have the shibboleth, where we can go around and because right now, you ask someone out in the narthex, hey, what do you think of Pope Francis? Like, oh, he's a humble, merciful guy and all. But there's no what do you believe is Does Christ have two natures or one nature? Please answer the question.
Right. There's no quick sine qua non.
Yes.
But also, I wonder why you expect that. Given what you just said about modernism, Pius X, the encouragement to lie, really, among their ranks, right? Why would they? What incentive do they have to tell the truth? If it's kind of like Islam, remember, they're allowed to lie when they're surrounded by infidels. They're allowed to lie. They're encouraged to lie. That's the most dangerous kind of ideology. In modernism, the modernists are being encouraged among their own ranks to tell lies about it. So, how are we going to get that shibboleth? I don't think we can. I mean, we'll have to begin to operate more shrewdly against it on that basis. But I don't know if we're going to be able to find a quick fix for it, the way you're saying the Arians had,
Right. I kind of wonder, when I read this Millar piece, what if women's ordination is it? What if that was the shibboleth?
Yeah.
Do you accept women ordination or not?
Yeah, but I mean,
it's very clear. But I guess it doesn't touch on all the other modernist tenets. Like the multiplication of bread and wine was people just sharing their lunches. That's modernism. Like it doesn't touch on those pernicious elements.
Well, there's metonymy. There's also synecdoche, where you say the White House spoke this afternoon, and it's just one representative. I'm fine with representative thinking, with virtual representation. I'd be fine with that. I'm just skeptical about the possibility of it happening, because it was also somewhat easy to say, well, where do you stand on communion for the civil remarried? It's a mouthful, but it's a little less catchy, and it's likely to piss a few less people off. But this will piss a few more people off, but it's still not catchy. It's still not, filioque up or down, or whatever, consubstantiality up or down. We have more complex problems than the ancients did. That's one way that I accept this Straussian, and this is almost the only way I accept this Straussian bright line that Leo Strauss and all his followers were obsessed with, between antiquity and modernity. I don't think there's any ground for the line, except maybe in the way cultural discourse happens. We do have more complex problems than the ancients. The progressives of our day, compared against Arius, are better at disguising themselves and have less honor. I mean,
that's right.
There's honor to Arius. That's like, no, I'll tell you my position. That's called honor.
Yeah.
Even if he's wrong, which he was.
Right. But those today, it's the Peronist thing that we've talked about, right? Francis will say one thing to one group and another thing to another group. And the pastor, Slim Jim Martin will say one thing in one context and one thing in another,
Right.
And even, well, I'll leave it at that. Any more examples? That's the problem.
Because there's so many examples of it. That's the point.
Yeah. So, all right. Well, we reached an hour and 30 minutes, Tim.
The people should go look up that passage in Scripture. It was Romans 13. Was it verse 4?
Yeah.
Just so because I think it's nice to get the double whammy effect with all the death penalty foolishness
and the deacon.
I've been debating on Twitter, and the deacon foolishness. Right? It's 13:4.
Yeah.
Is it Romans 13:4?
Let me see here. It is 13:4. Yeah. The magistrate is God's diakonos, deacon, working for thy good. Only if thou dost wrong needest thou be afraid. It is not for nothing that he bears the sword. He is God's diakonos, still to inflict punishment on the wrongdoer. Boom. Death penalty. There it is.
Sword. Yeah, that's what that means.
Yeah, I met a guy after Latin Mass. I went to St. Benedict's Fraternity Parish in Fort Worth instead of Mater Dei yesterday, and I met a guy afterwards. And I think he was a convert. But he was really into phaser and looking at the death penalty, and he's like, it's not just the death penalty issue. It's, can the church change on faith and morals?
Right.
It's I think sometimes you and I don't hit that. We just hit the death penalty part, but it's really comes down to, can one pope change the dogma on faith and morals in contradiction to so many other popes? It's dangerous to the faith.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it doesn't really matter how juicy the issue is, as long as
Right.
it's something that is a teaching on faith or morals, like your friend said, your new friend said.
Yeah.
It might be a boring issue, and this is something I've long suspected. As a parting shot, I'll say this: I think what the modernists try to do sometimes they pick juicy issues that are substantively interesting and alluring, like the women issue, feminists get deacon girls, whatever, girl deacons. That's just because they can't help themselves, right? It's like it's too delectable a treat
Right.
for them. But what they'd be really smart to do, I hope none are listening, is to change, because they want to destroy the faith because they're satanic or whatever. Change teachings on faith or morals on less juicy issues that are less near and dear to your heart, so you
Right.
don't even get as much opposition.
Yeah.
It's delectable for them to talk about anything involving women or gays, right? And getting them into new domains that they haven't been.
Yeah.
And it's just what the left really loves. They start licking their chops.
Yeah. It's like, let's
Or
have a Coke party. Let's go.
Right.
Yeah. Like excited,
Right.
Get the mirrors out and the razor blades. Let's party.
Right. Right. At the CDF.
Yeah, at the CDF.
Or a death penalty, because that's SJW. We're going to
yeah.
eradicate something.
Justice.
But like your friend said, it really is like, take a boring teaching on faith and morals, subvert it, and you're putting all the faithful betters to their money.
Yeah. It's like
If
hollow
they're
out. You already
smart,
talked
they do
about
it.
hollow out. It's hollow out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it.
Oh, there was something else I wanted to read. I just remembered. I forgot. I brought my Denzinger to class today, and
Nice.
I wanted to read from the Council of Trent on the minor orders, because you might think, oh, they're just talking about minor orders. It's kind of dumb. Like you were saying, like these are minor issues, right? Minor orders. Who really cares? I wanted to read what the Council of Trent says on the minor orders, and you realize this is a big deal. So this is the canons of the Council of Trent, and it says, "And from the beginning of the church, the names of the following orders and ministries proper to each one, namely to those of subdeacon, acolyte, exorcist, lector, and porter, are known to have been in use, though they were not of equal rank. For the subdiaconate is counted among the major orders by the fathers in the holy councils, in which very frequently we also read about the other lower orders." So this is an ecumenical council. Then you get to the canons. This is Canon 2 on holy orders, and it contains an anathema. Canon 2.
Oh.
"If anyone says that besides the priesthood there are not in the Catholic Church no other orders, major and minor, by which as by various steps one advances towards the priesthood, let him be anathema."
Wow.
Boom. Drop the mic. I'm going to read it again. Listen. "If
Pretty big.
anyone says that besides the priesthood there are in the Catholic Church no other orders, major and minor, by which, as by various steps, one advances towards the priesthood, let him be anathema." So, according to the Council of Trent, I wish I would have read this earlier, I just forgot. According to the Council of
big.
Trent, if anyone says the minor orders don't exist, he's anathema. Boom. Boom goes the dynamite.
So what do we do with that? I mean,
I believe in it. That's what I do.
Well, I know, but so who got rid of the minor orders? Which I mean,
Paul the
what-
Sixth.
I know. It's just it feels.
And if you
like
want to
a
learn
bridge
about
too
Paul the
hard.
Sixth, go read my book Infiltration. You're gonna be blown away. Paul the Sixth. Wow.
But
I mean,
then,
does that
so
mean
what is
Paul
it?
the Sixth is anathema? I don't know.
That's what I'm saying. Like, is that what? I don't know. It's beyond. It's ultra virus at a certain point. It's like, this is beyond my ken. I don't know what to.
I mean, if the Council of Trent says if anyone denies the major or minor orders, let him be anathema.
It's
It's
wild.
not good. It's not good. I think we'll end there.
Yeah.
It's not
wild,
good,
dude.
man. So, all right. Well, one thing that was impressed upon me being in the Holy Land is the rosary, because I would go to all these places and I'd be, this is where the Annunciation happened. This is the visitation. I realized I'd been visiting all of these places in the mysteries of the rosary for years. And
right.
Now, it was more of my own imagination and what I have gleaned
Right.
from the sacred scriptures, but I was like, man, I've been making pilgrimages to the Holy Land every single day in the rosary. And so I think that's a kind of a new thing I wanted to bring to TNT today is every time you pray the rosary, you're making a pilgrimage to these holy sites. You should see yourself at the Nativity there at the creche of Jesus with Joseph and Mary with your beads adoring the infant Christ. If it's finding Jesus in the temple, you should kind of see yourself off to the side with some rabbis and see Joseph and Mary finding the young Christ there in the temple and meditating on that.
Freaked out Joseph and Mary.
Yeah,
you know?
yeah. I mean, so all of these things, you're making a mental and a heartfelt pilgrimage every time you pray the rosary. So everyone must pray the rosary. Our Lady of Fatima came down from heaven, came off of her throne at the right hand of Jesus, came down here and said, hey, pray the rosary every day. So if you're not praying the rosary every day, you're not on the team. You can watch these videos and you can complain about things in the church and, oh, the Amazon Synod and women deacons, boo-hoo. But as laity, we can't hear confessions and we can't preach in the pulpit and we can't say mass. What we can do is pray, and the prayer that's given to us is the rosary. So if you're not praying the daily rosary, you're not part of the team. You're not part of the solution as laid out by Our Lady of Fatima, if you believe in Fatima, which we all do. So you got to pray the rosary every single day. And of course, be true to your vocation. Love your spouses, your kids, if you're a priest, your people, your breviary, your mass, all that. Anything you want to add, Tim?
No, I'm kind of staggered today, but it's all good stuff.
Is it because I dropped the Council of Trent, let him be anathema on the minor orders? That kind of blew you away.
That's part of it. That's part of it. Sometimes you just get, in a minor way, in a non-melodramatic way, a little overwhelmed. I mean, it's just, for one thing, we haven't done this in a while, a couple weeks, and it's like, man, to come back to having to talk about it and having, by virtue of the fact that, you know, a fair amount of people watch the show, to sound somewhat intelligent about some really staggering, novel, and rather unintelligible propositions of history as it's happening now. Sometimes it's just like, man, I don't know if I've ever expressed this kind of thing before, but it feels like a lot of responsibility, even as a lay person, and even as someone that's used to talking about reasonably important things in front of young minds. You know, teachers, theology teachers are teaching, unless you're just burying your head in the sand, which is, I think, what a lot of them are doing. Teaching on the Synod as it was happening. I did Synod lectures in 2014, 2015, and it's like, okay, I got to watch what I say. But like I say, that was slower, that was easier, that was clearer. Yeah, sometimes it just feels like a great burden, you know?
Yeah. Carrying the ring into Mordor. Right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that's one of the great things about praying the rosary is that you enter into those things, especially like the carrying of the cross. We did the Via Dolorosa. We did the real Stations of the Cross where Jesus actually carried the cross. And, I mean, it was just... I saw we actually woke up at like 4 a.m. and did that as the light was coming. And then we went to the Holy Sepulchre, went to Golgotha, and then had Mass at the tomb. So we literally did Good Friday, Holy Saturday, Sunday, all within about 2 or 3 hours. It was the most powerful experience of my entire life. So, I mean, it's carrying the cross. Like Jesus says, take up your cross. Like we have to carry. We have to lift. And so that's part of it. I think we can't get it. We do get overwhelmed looking at it. But we can do all things through him who strengthens us. So there is hope.
That's right.
And we can move on. So, all right. Well, everybody subscribe. Please like the video. If you want to get some merch and signed books, go visit Taylor Marshall or Dr. Taylor Marshall at Patreon. And, we need to close with the prayer. So should we do Ave Maria? Hail Mary?
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
Let's do that. And we have, Tim, we have 1,100 people with us right now live.
Oh, do we?
Yeah.
They found us?
They found they found us. So
we had a little snafu.
Yeah. But we have 11. So all 1,100 of you with us. We'll pray the Hail Mary, and we'll pray this for Holy Mother Church, and for clarity and holiness and purity, and for all of those who are discouraged and need hope or are suffering. We'll pray for them as well. So, in nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
Amen.
Ave Maria, gratia plena, Dominus tecum, benedicta tu in mulieribus, et benedictus fructus ventris tui, Iesus. Sancta Maria, Mater Dei, ora pro nobis peccatoribus, nunc et at hora mortis nostrae. Amen. All right, well, everyone, thanks for watching, and please subscribe, please like, and we'll see you in videos to come. God bless. All right, now I got to actually, since we're live, I got to turn it off.